I was a soldier, through and through. My name is Mark, and for over 2 decades, the military was my life. I lived by a code, discipline, loyalty, and honor. Those values shaped everything I did, from the crack of dawn to the silence of the night, whether in the chaos of the battlefield or the solitude of reflection after a mission. In the military, you learn to rely on what you can see, hear, and feel. Faith in anything intangible. That wasn't part of my training. My world was governed by logic, strategy, and the cold reality of survival. When I enlisted at 18, I was full of pride and purpose. The uniform represented everything I believed in. A chance to serve my country, protect others, and stand for something greater than myself. But as the years passed and the missions grew more dangerous, that sense of pride began to erode. War has a way of stripping away illusions. I saw things I never thought I would. Destruction, suffering, the loss of friends who were more like family. I carried the weight of decisions that no one should ever have to make. Each mission left its mark, not just on my body, but on my soul. It wasn't long before I began to question everything. Where was God in all of this? I had grown up hearing about him, but on the battlefield, he seemed absent. The prayers I whispered before missions felt empty, like throwing words into a void. If God existed, why would he allow so much suffering? These questions gnawed at me, but I buried them deep, just like the other scars I didn't want to face. By the time I retired, I was a shell of the man I used to be. The discipline and structure that had guided me for so long were gone, replaced by a restless void. Civilians would thank me for my service, but their words felt hollow. They didn't know the cost. They didn't see the nightmares or feel the guilt that came from surviving when others didn't. I tried to move on, but the past had a way of catching up. The faces of fallen comrades haunted me, and the questions I had buried began to surface. Was there any meaning to it all? Or was life just a series of random events, a game of chance with no higher purpose? For years, I lived in a kind of limbo, going through the motions, but feeling lost. I couldn't find peace, no matter how hard I tried. My body began to wear down too. The injuries I had sustained over the years, fractures, shrapnel wounds, and the constant strain of combat left me in chronic pain. I joked with friends that I was a walking patch job, held together by luck and medical tape. But the truth was, I felt like a ticking time bomb, waiting for my body to give out completely. And then it happened. One evening, I was at home, trying to relax after a particularly difficult day. The pain in my chest started as a dull ache, barely noticeable at first. I figured it was just indigestion, too much coffee, and not enough sleep. But within minutes, it grew sharper, spreading to my left arm and up my neck. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me. Panic set in as I realized something was seriously wrong. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The operator's voice was calm, but her words were distant, drowned out by the pounding in my ears. "Help is on the way," she said. I remember collapsing onto the floor, clutching my chest as the pain intensified. My vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. In that moment, I thought about everything. The life I had lived, the people I had loved, and the countless questions that still lingered. The last thing I remember was hearing the sound of sirens in the distance. My body felt heavy, like it was sinking into the floor, and the world around me began to fade. As the darkness closed in, I felt a strange sense of both fear and anticipation. I didn't know what was happening or what lay ahead, but something told me this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a journey I could never have imagined. The first thing I became aware of was the silence. Not the kind of silence you find in a quiet room, but a deep, overwhelming stillness that seemed to stretch in all directions. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the absence of everything. For a moment, I wondered if this was what death felt like. But then, I saw it. Me. My body was sprawled on the floor of my living room, motionless. My face was pale, and my lips had turned an unnatural shade of blue. Paramedics were crouched beside me, moving with urgency as they applied chest compressions and prepared a defibrillator. Their voices were muffled, like I was hearing them through water, but I could see the panic in their eyes. I tried to call out, to let them know I was still there, but no sound came. That's when it hit me. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it, watching everything unfold like an observer in someone else's story. The realization was both terrifying and strangely calming. There was no pain, no weight pulling me down. For the first time in years, I felt free. I floated there, suspended in the stillness, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could I be here, watching my own body? How was any of this possible? I had spent my life grounded in reality, in logic and reason. This defied all of it. As I hovered, the scene below began to blur, as if the edges of reality were dissolving. The sounds of the paramedics faded into the background, replaced by a faint hum. A sound so subtle, it was more like a feeling than a noise. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A light. At first, it was small, barely noticeable against the darkness that surrounded me. But as I focused on it, the light grew brighter, more intense. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, almost alive. It pulsed gently, as though it were breathing, and with each pulse, I felt a strange pull toward it. I wanted to resist. Every logical part of me screamed that this wasn't real, that it couldn't be happening. But the pull was undeniable. It wasn't just drawing me in, it was inviting me, beckoning me towards something I couldn't quite understand. As I drifted closer, the light seemed to envelop me, surrounding me with a warmth that was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical warmth, it was something deeper, something that touched my very soul. It was peace, not the fleeting kind you find in quiet moments, but a peace so profound, it felt like it had always been there, waiting for me to find it. In that light, the doubts and fears that had haunted me for years began to fade. The questions that had plagued me about war, about suffering, about the existence of God seemed less urgent, less pressing. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt whole. But the light wasn't just peaceful, it was powerful. There was a presence within it, something vast and immeasurable. It wasn't intimidating or threatening, but it was undeniable. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to draw closer. As I moved toward it, I became aware of a strange sensation, like something deep within me was being laid bare. It was as though every part of me, every thought, every action, every moment of my life was being seen, not with judgment, but with an understanding so complete it left me breathless. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but I couldn't find the words. How could I? What could I possibly say in the presence of something so infinite, so beyond anything I had ever known? The pull grew stronger, and I realized there was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, I had to see it. I had to know. As I entered the light fully, the world I had known, the paramedics, my body, the living room, faded completely. I was no longer floating above anything. I was surrounded by the light, consumed by its warmth and power. And yet, I didn't feel lost. I felt found, as though I had been searching for this my entire life without even knowing it. I could sense that I was on the verge of something unimaginable, something that would change everything. Whatever lay within the light, I knew it held answers I had been searching for my entire life, and answers I didn't even know I needed. And then, just as I felt myself fully surrender to the pull, the presence within the light grew stronger. It wasn't just watching me now, it was waiting for me. I was no longer just a soldier, or a man, or a body floating between life and death. I was something more, standing at the threshold of a truth that would redefine everything I thought I knew. What happened next would change me forever. As I stood in the light, surrounded by its warmth and peace, the presence I had felt earlier became unmistakable. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a person. I turned, though I wasn't sure how I knew to do so, and there he was. He stood in the light, yet he was the light. His presence radiated love, compassion, and a sense of authority that was both humbling and comforting. I didn't need an introduction to know who he was. This was Jesus. Every part of me, my mind, my heart, my very soul, knew it. And yet I couldn't comprehend it. How could someone I had doubted my entire life be standing before me, so undeniably real? I wanted to speak, but words failed me. It wasn't fear that held me back. It was awe. In his presence, everything felt laid bare. My pain, my doubts, my failures, they were all exposed, and yet I didn't feel judged. I felt understood, as though he had seen it all and loved me anyway. "Mark," he said, his voice gentle yet powerful, resonating deep within me. It wasn't just a sound, it was an experience. When he spoke my name, it was as if he knew every part of me, every moment of my life, even the ones I had tried to forget. "I know your pain," he continued. "I know the burden you carry." I felt tears streaming down my face, though I hadn't realized I could cry in this place. How could he know? How could anyone understand the weight I had carried for so long? The faces of my fallen comrades, the decisions I had made, the lives lost. They had haunted me for years. And yet, in his presence, I felt that weight begin to lift. "You've questioned if there is meaning in what you've seen, in what you've done," he said. "You've doubted me, doubted that I could exist in a world filled with so much suffering. I nodded, unable to deny it. Those doubts had been my constant companion, whispering in the back of my mind every time I saw something too horrible to comprehend. If God was real, how could he allow such pain? Jesus stepped closer, and the light around him seemed to grow even brighter. "Mark," he said, "the suffering you've seen was never my design. It was the result of choices, of a world that has turned away from me. But even in the midst of that pain, I have always been there." His words pierced me. I thought about the moments on the battlefield when I had whispered desperate prayers, not really believing anyone was listening. Was he saying he had been there all along? "I was with you in the darkest moments," he said, as though reading my thoughts. "I wept with you when you saw your friends fall. I carried you when you thought you couldn't go on. I couldn't hold back anymore." "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you save them?" Jesus' eyes met mine, filled with a love so profound it made my question feel small. "Mark," he said, "I gave humanity free will, the ability to choose love or hate, peace or war. I don't force my will upon anyone, but I am always there, offering hope, offering redemption." I wanted to argue, to push back, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew he was right. The suffering I had seen wasn't his doing, it was ours. And yet, in his presence, I felt no anger, only a deep sense of sorrow for the way things were. As if sensing my thoughts, Jesus extended his hand. "Let me show you," he said. In an instant, the light around us shifted, and I was no longer standing still. I was moving, though I couldn't feel my feet. Visions began to unfold before me, vivid and undeniable. I saw Jesus walking among the people of his time, healing the sick, comforting the brokenhearted, and teaching with a wisdom that transcended anything I had ever known. I saw him in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying with such intensity that tears of blood fell from his face. I felt his anguish as he carried the weight of the world's sins, a burden I couldn't begin to comprehend. And then I saw him on the cross. The pain, the suffering, the sacrifice, it was overwhelming. But what struck me most wasn't the physical torment, it was the love. Even as he hung there, battered and broken, his love for humanity was unwavering. He wasn't just dying for the people of his time. He was dying for me, for everyone who had ever lived and ever would. Tears streamed down my face as the reality of his sacrifice hit me. This wasn't a story or a metaphor. It was real. He had given everything so that we could have a chance at redemption, at eternal life. As the vision faded, I found myself back in the light, standing before Jesus once more. His eyes were filled with compassion, and I knew he understood the storm raging inside me. "You've seen what I've done for you," he said. "Now you must understand what it means." I didn't know how to respond. My entire worldview had been shattered in the span of moments. Everything I thought I knew about life, about faith, about God, it was all being rewritten. But even in my confusion, one thing was clear. This was the truth. He was the truth. "Mark," Jesus said, his voice firm yet gentle, "there is more I need to show you. What you have seen is only the beginning." His words sent a shiver through me. If this was just the beginning, I couldn't begin to imagine what lay ahead. But I knew one thing: whatever it was, it would change me forever. As the light around me shifted once again, I felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. Jesus stood beside me, his presence steady and comforting, but I could sense that what I was about to see would be unlike anything I had experienced so far. "Mark," he said gently, "you've seen what I've done for you. Now, it's time to see the choices that lie before every soul." Before I could respond, the light around us seemed to expand, revealing a new scene. It was unlike anything I had ever imagined. In the distance, I saw a place so beautiful, so radiant, it defied description. Heaven, I just knew it was heaven. The colors were vivid, beyond anything the human eye could comprehend. Golden light bathed everything, not harsh, but warm and alive. The air, or whatever it was, seemed to hum with music, a symphony of voices and instruments blending together in perfect harmony. Yet, it wasn't just sound, it was love. Every note carried a depth of emotion so profound, it filled me with peace. As I moved closer, I saw people, countless souls, radiating joy and peace. Their faces shone with a light of their own, not from themselves, but from being in the presence of something infinitely greater. In the center of it all was a throne, majestic and radiant. The presence of God was undeniable, his love and holiness emanating in waves that touched everything. "This," Jesus said, "is the fulfillment of my promise, a place where there is no pain, no sorrow, no death. Only life, love, and unity with me." The sight filled me with a longing so intense, it brought me to my knees. For the first time, I felt what it truly meant to be whole, to be loved in a way that required nothing in return. This was where we were meant to be, where every soul was created to dwell. But as I stood there, basking in the beauty of heaven, the scene began to shift. The light dimmed, and the warmth gave way to an unsettling cold. I felt an ache in my chest, as though something vital was being pulled away. Darkness began to creep in, and I sensed we were descending into a different place. "Now," Jesus said, his tone heavy with sorrow, "you must see what separation from me looks like." The darkness grew deeper, oppressive and suffocating. It wasn't the absence of light, it was the presence of something consuming, something alive. The air was thick with despair, and the sounds that reached my ears were unlike anything I had ever heard. Cries, wails, and anguished screams echoed endlessly, each one filled with regret and hopelessness. In the shadows, I saw figures, countless souls, but they were not like those in heaven. They were tormented, trapped in a place where love and peace could not reach. They clawed at the air, their faces twisted with pain and longing. They weren't being tortured by external forces, it was the absence of God that consumed them. "Hell," Jesus said quietly, "is not a punishment I impose. It is the result of a choice to reject the light, to reject love, to reject me." I struggled to look away, but Jesus held my gaze, his sorrow clear. "Every soul was created to be with me," he said, "but I will not force myself upon anyone. Love requires freedom, and with freedom comes the possibility of rejection." Tears streamed down my face as I watched the suffering unfold. It was unbearable, not just because of the pain, but because of the knowledge that it didn't have to be this way. Each soul here had been offered the same grace, the same love, but they had turned away. As the vision faded, I found myself back in the light, standing once again in the presence of Jesus. My heart felt heavy, burdened by what I had seen. "Why did you show me this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because you needed to understand," he said. "You needed to see the reality of the choices every soul must make. Heaven and hell are not distant concepts. They are the destinations of a journey defined by faith, love, and grace." I nodded, though the weight of his words was almost too much to bear. "But what can I do?" I asked. "I'm just one person. How can I make a difference?" Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder, and a warmth spread through me. "Mark, your story matters. Your life, your experiences, your pain, they are all part of a greater purpose. You have been given this glimpse not for yourself alone, but to inspire others, to guide them toward the truth." The thought was overwhelming. Me, a soldier who had doubted and questioned, who had carried so much guilt and pain, how could I possibly be worthy of such a calling? But as if sensing my doubts, Jesus looked at me with a love so deep it erased every shred of uncertainty. "You are enough, Mark," he said. "You always have been." His words settled into my heart, and for the first time, I felt a sense of purpose, a purpose that transcended anything I had ever known. "It's time for you to return," he said, his voice filled with both firmness and compassion. I hesitated, not wanting to leave his presence, but I knew he was right. My journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the light around me began to fade, I felt a deep sense of both gratitude and responsibility. What I had seen and heard wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. And I knew that when I returned, my life would never be the same. The moment I felt my body again, it was like being plunged into ice water. Everything was loud, chaotic, and overwhelming. The warmth and peace of the light were gone, replaced by the sterile brightness of the hospital room and the frantic voices of the medical team. "He's back! We've got a pulse!" someone shouted, their tone filled with both relief and urgency. I blinked, trying to focus, but my vision was blurry and my body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Every breath was labored, every movement a struggle. I could hear the beeping of machines, the rush of people around me, and the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. But what hit me hardest wasn't the physical discomfort, it was the disconnection. I had just been in a place so full of love, so full of truth, that being back in this world felt almost alien. The weight of gravity, the noise, the confusion, it was all too much. "Mark, can you hear me?" a voice asked. It sounded distant, even though I knew it was right beside me. I managed a slight nod, though my mind was still reeling. How could I possibly explain what I had just experienced? How could I even begin to process it myself? The next few hours passed in a haze. Doctors and nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting machines, and speaking in tones that I couldn't fully grasp. My family arrived, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. They held my hands, whispered words of love and gratitude, but I could barely respond. My mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop replaying what I had seen and felt. The light, the presence of Jesus, the visions of heaven and hell. It was all so vivid, so real, and yet it felt impossible to explain. How could I, a man who had spent his entire life grounded in logic and discipline, begin to comprehend something so beyond the physical world? Over the next few days, as I regained my strength, the questions only grew louder. I had always prided myself on being a realist, a soldier who trusted what could be seen and proven. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't just a fleeting dream or a trick of the mind. It was real. I knew it in my core. And yet doubt crept in. Was it possible I had imagined it? That my brain, deprived of oxygen, had conjured up these vivid images as a coping mechanism? But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the truth remained. I had been there. I had seen him. The internal struggle was relentless. Part of me wanted to dismiss the experience, to chalk it up to something my mind had fabricated. But another part, the deeper, quieter part, knew better. What I had encountered wasn't something that could be explained away. It was truth, plain and simple. I began searching for answers, desperate to make sense of what had happened. Late at night, when the hospital was quiet and my family had gone home, I would pick up my phone and search for stories of near-death experiences. I found accounts that were eerily similar to mine. People who had seen the light, who had felt the presence of Jesus, who had glimpsed heaven and hell. I started reading the Bible, a book I had barely touched since childhood. At first, it felt foreign, almost intimidating. But the more I read, the more pieces began to fall into place. The words seemed to speak directly to me, resonating in a way I had never experienced before. One passage in particular stayed with me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Those words echoed in my mind, aligning perfectly with what Jesus had shown me. Still, the questions lingered. Why me? Why had I been given this experience? What was I supposed to do with it? As a soldier, I had always believed in purpose, in every action serving a greater mission. But this felt so much bigger than anything I had ever known. And then there was the fear of sharing my story. What would people think? Would they believe me? Would they think I had lost my mind? I had spent my entire life as a man of discipline and reason, a man who relied on facts and logic. How could I now stand before others and speak of something so deeply spiritual, so beyond explanation? But the more I wrestled with these doubts, the more I felt a pull, a quiet yet persistent voice urging me to share what I had seen. This wasn't just for me. It wasn't about me at all. It was about the truth I had been shown, a truth that needed to be shared. By the time I left the hospital, I had made a decision. No matter how difficult it might be, I would tell my story. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. What I had experienced was too important to keep to myself. As I sat in the car, watching the world rush by, I felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. I didn't know how people would react, but I knew one thing for certain. My life had been changed forever, and I wasn't going to waste the second chance I had been given. When I first decided to share my experience, I didn't know where to begin. How do you explain something so profound, so beyond the realm of what most people understand? I started with those closest to me, my family. They had been there in the hospital, watching as I hovered between life and death. If anyone would understand the weight of what I had been through, it was them. Sitting around the dining table one evening, I told them everything. My voice trembled as I recounted the moment I left my body, the light that drew me in, and my meeting with Jesus. I described the love and compassion in his eyes, the visions of heaven and hell, and the truth he had revealed to me. By the time I finished, the room was silent. My wife looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Mark," she said softly, "are you sure this wasn't—" "I don't know, a dream. Maybe your mind—" "It wasn't a dream," I interrupted gently. "I've had dreams before. This was something else entirely. It was real. I know it was." My kids, grown adults now, exchanged glances. I could tell they didn't know how to respond. Finally, my eldest said, "Dad, if this is what you believe, then we support you. But it's a lot to take in." I couldn't blame them. It was a lot to take in. Even I was still processing it. But the fact that they listened, that they didn't dismiss me outright, gave me hope. Next, I reached out to a few close friends. Some were curious, asking questions about what I had seen and felt. Others were more skeptical, nodding politely but clearly unsure of how to respond. One friend, a fellow veteran, listened intently as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You know, I've always wondered about this stuff. Maybe there's more to it than we realize." Those words stuck with me. Maybe there was more to it, and maybe my story could help others see that. As the weeks passed, I found myself drawn to church, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. At first, I sat in the back, listening quietly as the pastor spoke about grace, love, and salvation. The words resonated deeply, aligning with everything I had experienced in the light. I started attending regularly, and before long, I was delving into scripture with a hunger I had never known. The Bible, which had once seemed like an outdated relic, came alive to me. Every passage, every verse seemed to hold new meaning. I saw the connections between what Jesus had shown me and the message of salvation written in those ancient pages. It was as if my entire life had been leading to this moment, to this understanding. But attending church and reading the Bible weren't enough. The pull to share my story grew stronger with each passing day. I began writing down everything I could remember, every detail of my experience. The light, the love, the truth. It was all there, etched into my soul, and I needed to put it into words. One Sunday, after the service, I approached the pastor. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I asked, my voice hesitant. "Of course," he said with a warm smile. "What's on your mind?" I told him everything. My near-death experience, my encounter with Jesus, and the visions I had been shown. To my surprise, he didn't question or doubt me. Instead, he listened with an open heart, nodding occasionally as I spoke. "Mark," he said when I finished, "your story is powerful. It's a testament to God's grace and love. Have you thought about sharing it with others?" "I have," I admitted, "but I don't know where to start. What if people don't believe me? He placed a hand on my shoulder. Some won't, and that's okay. But there are others who need to hear this, who need to know that God is real and that His love is infinite. Your story could change lives. His words gave me the courage I needed. I started small, sharing my experience in church groups and community meetings. Each time, I was met with a mix of reactions: curiosity, skepticism, and occasionally tears. Some people came up to me afterward, thanking me for sharing and telling me how much my story had touched them. Others walked away quietly, their faces thoughtful. One evening, after speaking at a local event, a woman approached me. "I lost my husband last year," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been struggling to believe that he's at peace. Hearing your story, it gave me hope. Thank you." In that moment, I realized why I had been given this experience. It wasn't just for me, it was for others, for people searching for answers, for hope, for something greater. My story was a bridge, a way to connect the seen and the unseen, the physical and the spiritual. As I prepared to share my story on a larger scale, the doubts still crept in. What if I wasn't enough? What if I couldn't do justice to the truth I had been shown? But then I remembered Jesus' words. "You are enough, Mark. You always have been." With that reassurance, I knew I could face whatever came next. My journey was far from over, but I was ready to take the next step. Not for myself, but for the countless souls who needed to hear the truth that love, grace, and salvation are real, and that they are waiting for everyone willing to accept them. As I stepped into this new chapter of my life, I realized that sharing my story wasn't just about recounting what I had seen and felt. It was about living out the truth I had discovered. Everything about me, from my perspective on life to the way I interacted with others, began to change. I started speaking to groups of veterans, men and women, who had walked similar paths to mine, carrying the same burdens of war and loss. I understood their skepticism because I had been there. For so long, I had clung to logic and discipline as my anchors, dismissing anything that couldn't be explained or proven. But now, I stood before them, not as a preacher, but as one of their own, a soldier with a story that couldn't be ignored. Faith doesn't mean ignoring the hard truths of the world, I told them. It means seeing beyond them. It means recognizing that even in the darkest moments, there is a light greater than anything we can imagine. Some nodded, others stared quietly, but I could see the wheels turning in their minds. For many, it wasn't about converting them on the spot. It was about planting a seed, offering a perspective they hadn't considered. As I spoke to civilians, the message shifted slightly. I talked about the universality of grace, how it was available to everyone, regardless of their background or experiences. I shared the visions of heaven and hell, the choices we all face, and the overwhelming love of Jesus that had changed my life. The response was humbling. People from all walks of life began reaching out, sharing their own stories of doubt, faith, and transformation. One day, a young man approached me after a talk. My father was in the military, he said. He never talked about what he went through, but I could see it in his eyes. Hearing your story, it makes me think he might have been carrying more than he let on. Thank you for sharing this. His words stayed with me. I realized that my story wasn't just for those who had experienced the same things I had. It was for anyone searching for hope, for answers, for the courage to believe in something greater. Through it all, I leaned on grace, the grace I had felt in the presence of Jesus. The grace that had lifted the weight of my doubts and fears became my guiding force. It allowed me to reconnect with my family in ways I never thought possible. The conversations that had once felt strained now flowed with honesty and love. I apologized for the times my struggles had made me distant, and they, in turn, shared their own fears and hopes. Together, we found healing. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming, when the skepticism of others made me question my own convictions, when I worried I wasn't doing enough. In those moments, I returned to prayer, to the Bible, to the memory of the light and the love I had experienced. Every time, I found the strength to keep going. As the months turned into years, my mission expanded. I began working with organizations that supported veterans, helping them find not just physical healing, but spiritual renewal. I also partnered with churches and community groups, bridging the gap between military discipline and faith. My story became a tool, a way to show that no matter how far someone felt from God, they were never truly alone. One of the most profound moments came when I was invited to speak at a large conference. As I stood on the stage, looking out at the faces of thousands of people, I felt a surge of gratitude. This wasn't about me. It was about the truth I had been given, the truth that had transformed my life. None of us are here by accident, I told them. We're all part of a greater story, one that's been written with love and purpose. I've seen what lies beyond this life, and I can tell you this: every choice we make matters. Every act of faith, every moment of grace, it all leads us closer to the light. The applause that followed wasn't for me. It was for the message, for the truth, for the hope that we all so desperately need. As I reflect on everything, I'm filled with a sense of peace. My life has been far from perfect, but I see now that every challenge, every doubt, every moment of pain was leading me to this purpose, to share the light, to show others that grace is real, that love is eternal, and that Jesus is waiting for each of us with open arms. To anyone listening to this story, I want to leave you with this. No matter where you are in life, no matter how far you feel from faith or hope, it's never too late. Seek the truth with an open heart, and you will find it. If this story has touched you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments or leave your name so we can pray for you. And if you're looking for more inspiration, check out the other incredible NDE stories we've shared. You are not alone in this journey, and the truth is always within reach. Thank you for being part of this, and God bless you.